Shall we play a game?
We got one person online. The workload is enough for like 10 users. I think we got a hacker.
Shall we play a game?
What are they doing to him? Breaking into his mind. It's like hacking a computer. All it takes is time.
Red alert! All hands command stations.
Hello, friend.
Welcome to Red Spy 365.
Shall we play a game?
Hey, good afternoon. It's a podcast, a full podcast, not a morning brief. The dark clouds are gathering outside. It feels like the world is about to end. I can feel the clouds outside gathering. It's been a couple of days of like really, really hot weather. Not complaining, love it. Apart from the mosquitoes, I hate and mosquitoes are evil. Don't think they really serve any real purpose apart from trying to fee-fi-fo-fum an Englishman. And they get me, trust me, they wait outside the door. But it feels like the dark clouds are gathering. We're starting to see the whole universe become dark. I love storms. If you're one of these people, I love storms and lightning. I think it's always good. So I've been sitting here doing web application testing. Web applications are fun. When it comes down to it, you know, there's always like something around the corner. I always sit. If you ever know my setup, and I should actually do like a video. I have a secretary. She's my little schnauzer, little miniature schnauzer called Liberty Bell, or Wibby Woo Woo, as we call her. But she sits with me when I do web application testing, especially. She seems to like web application testing, not so much external static or phishing, but she's really into web application testing, and she'll sit with me and quite happily watch the laptop with her head on the laptop as I work through my scenarios or work through any kind of solutions that I'm trying to do, all in the name of gaining shell. It's good. It's fun. It's fun to get shell. Shell is it. But it's also fun to sort of, you know, get databasing. As I said, like the most fun I had was one weekend where I dumped about, 55,000 credit card numbers on a weekend as a legitimate test. It wasn't just like I went off and decided, it's an interesting site. Let me go and hack that site and see if I can get credit numbers. It was actually a part of a scope of work. I was legally down to do this, so it was kind of interesting. Also interesting, there's a lot of changes going on, you see, in the world. I mean, the big thing that's, been going on for the past couple of weeks is this Bluekeep. And, I always stress, and I cannot stress this more, threat surface reduction. And what do I mean by threat surface reduction? If you've got a port or service exposed to the internet, and you may be able to turn around and say, hey, Darren, there isn't a known vulnerability for this, it's fine. And I always say fine right now, or fine against the publicly aware stuff that we know of. The idea is that if you use threat surface reduction, you're trying to reduce what you expose to the world to be the most minimal possible. Not, hey, Bill wants to go home and use RDP at the weekend, therefore let me just open up RDP to the world because I can't be bothered to work out what Bill's IP address is, or he doesn't know it. Forget the fact that he's probably should be VPNing in anyway. You want to be able to control this access and audit this access. But the idea is you want to reduce that threat surface. And Bluekeep was the best example of why we tell companies to restrict certain ports. Things like, 3389, which is MSRDP, 21, 22, 23, so your FTP, your Telnet, your SSH. Anything really where people can bang on a username and password to see, slow and low. In other words, just a couple of credentials every day, keep trying it, see if they can get in, and eventually they will. But the idea is you want to be able to reduce that threat surface and obviously look at, account lockouts. Even account lockouts, though, they're okay. But again, slow and low. And, if someone reuses that password elsewhere, there's going to be an issue. And this is about the threat surface reduction. This is the keys. This is the gate. If you was a big castle, you're at the parapet, maybe you monitor the big wide world out there. But you're not sitting there and saying, okay, let me just look at the big wide world. There's nothing going on, therefore I must be safe. That's not how it works, is it? Just because the world out there isn't talking about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In fact, that's more of a worry. Usually because when the world is talking about it, they've usually moved on, the bad guys, that is, they've moved on to something else. So you may have that. I always look at, the Maginot Line. That was always a good analogy, isn't it? If you think of your external perimeter as a Maginot Line. The one thing you don't want to be is the pure Maginot Line with no defense in depth. But you do want to restrict that threat surface as part of it. You want to create a hardened candy shell, and you want to be the onion, not the egg. In other words, you want to have a layered defense and not something that's easily broken into. That's kind of threat surface reduction. Really important. We got to get to this point where we're only putting out there what we know. This is where web applications come into fun as well, and not just web applications, but those sort of dastardly things that are the bane of most security analysts' life, called users, that go clicking on things and go around clicking on stuff and opening documents, sent from, Fred, who's passed away and is out in Nigeria and trying to transfer some money, and they want to help him transfer that money. It's kind of funny. I get a lot of those emails just recently, where I know it's some lady sends me an email pretending to be, that her husband's deceased in Nigeria from a petrochemical company, and he has these millions, and they just want to transfer it for some reason. It just, I've always wanted to reply to them, but let me give you a hint. Don't goad them into it. It's you don't want to keep shaking the snake's tail, as it were. It will eventually come back and bite you. I remember a friend of mine went onto a whole conversation back and forth with these guys or girls, and it was really interesting. It was so funny. I mean, it was comical, but again, there can be consequences. I mean, don't forget, sometimes there can be legitimately real world consequences. Who's to say these people wouldn't send someone to your door or find your location or go after you? So it's just not worth it. Delete, move on. Life is too short. Life is good. So life is definitely too short to start worrying about what's going on with other people. So we've had this Blue Keep, which I think has been a great example of why we do threat surface reduction. And the other interesting part to talk about, I may see if I can get like Ian or Jonathan to sit there and do a part 2 discussion with this. We're talking about services and how, they're part of, especially like social media, they're part of, telecommunications. We think of social media now, Facebook, instant messaging, Signal, Telegram, all these kind of, I don't know, not internet relay chat, obviously, but, sort of chat messaging type systems, how we become reliant upon those, but how they can, a simple DOS can maybe disrupt communications inside a country. And we've seen that with China during the Hong Kong protests, where Telegram, basically the encrypted messaging app, went briefly off. I mean, don't forget, this is just briefly. They've got DDoS mitigation in place, briefly off air, but it shows you, hey, on a bigger scale, these things happen. Governments are able to do. They've got a lot more resource than me sitting in an armchair. They can put a lot more money into things, and obviously, they have the ability to do a lot more things. And I think, it was interesting. Like I was just watching the news, and they were talking about the New York Times article, talking about how we in the US are starting to ramp up our offensive capability against Russia's energy network. So, the electricity network, the grid. I was thought, that's kind of stupid. And then, coincidentally, and I'm no conspiracy theorist, but coincidentally over the weekend, Argentina and Uruguay get hit with a blackout. And no one's really saying what, no one's connecting the dots here, and I'm just maybe connecting the dot that's way too big, but it's kind of interesting, isn't it? We're talking about the offensive capability of, the US being aggressive against Russia, and all of a sudden, Argentina and Uruguay go off the grid, the power. Who knows what the power issue is? In fact, I've looked at it. I'm just actually looking now, see if anyone's updated it since I last talked. Outage source, because the internet obviously is the best way to find anything. Cool. All they're saying is massive failure. And that was it was an update an hour ago. So look at that. Power restore much of Uruguay, massive electrical failure. Full investigation. So no one's really saying, and they were preparing to go to the polls. The plot thickens. Everything's becoming a little bit more dicey. But isn't that weird? Just about to start something really bad happening. Well, we're talking about increasing our offensive capability, and all of a sudden, 2 South American countries go black. Now, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say that is a coincidence and a half. But I'm not, because things happen in this world that are just more bizarre than we ever care to think about. So, I'm just going to assume that this has got nothing to do with what we're doing, and it's everything, or the Russians, or the Chinese, or whoever, and this is all to do with just coincidence. We'll put it down to coincidence. Sounds good, eh? So what else has been going on in the last couple of weeks? Well, on the Red Spy front, we've been super busy. So this is where it's going to get interesting. You gotta bear with me on this. This is going to be sounding like Darren's losing his mind, but it's been quite interesting. I mean, it's been interesting the fact that we've been working on metrics. We want to be able to tell a bigger story, a user story, a CEO type story. So we're settling on some metrics to be able to put into the system. Because don't forget, 13.2 is coming up on us very fast. I get the software July 4th. Hey, Independence Day. So we get it Independence Day. And I'm going to be working over Independence Day to get the software verified so that we can push this in. And there's a lot of things that we're adding into 13.2. So with that in mind, let me just go over some of them, because it's always fun. But we're adding these metrics, and these metrics are kind of going to be important. So we're settling on things like the dwell time, so mean time to notify, mean time to respond, and mean time to remediate or fix the problem, as it were. And we're creating this thing called a significant event. And what is a significant event? Well, we have a criteria for significant events. So if I gain shell, or if there's a critical, vulnerability against a system that's got a lot of records on it, that's, we want to be able to notify those things. So, and that becomes a critical event. And I've got a whole list of critical events. So it's not like we're just going to pluck critical events out of the air. And it's not meaning that every event that occurs in Red Spy is a critical event, because that's not true. An event is just an event at times, and it's not a critical event. Someone clicking is not a critical event to me. It's an event. Someone clicking and running maybe the word macro and getting reverse shell. Hey, that's a critical event. Now I've got access, and we want to find out why that access and be able to remediate it. So it's important with this significant event, because we're going to use this significant event to be also able to create the return on security investment, because that's where, if we know the formula for the return on security investment, which is, a defendable formula, it's a very much interesting formula. I mean, it shows a lot of things. I mean, it's a formula that allows me to do and to work out how we do significant events. And I've got an example, so you may have to bear with me on this example, because to me this is defendable, and it's all about being defendable. So obviously, return on security events equals the annual loss expectancy times mitigation ratio minus cost of solution divided by cost of solution. That is the actual formula. I mean, it's good, it's fine, it's a formula. How do we get the annual loss expectancy? Well, that's how we get the single loss expectancy times 0.27, which is, the Ponemon IBM Research Institute document. That's how we get $148 per record. That's how we get, what is it, $401 a record for a medical record. But this is how we get those numbers, because they've done the research for us. They've created the numbers. So now we've got the numbers, we can plug them in. So you're going to get that dwell time, return on security investment, and that's going to look good. I mean, you're going to be able to push this up to the CEO. You're going to be able to show numbers in comparison and drill down on those numbers as well to show, where the return on security investment is, where your exposure is, how you're improving in your response time and your remediation time. All that is coming together nicely, So for a person like me, I'm not necessarily into the metrics, especially if it's, I guess just BS. It's just, I hate metrics for the sake of metrics. It's kind of like when you do a security policy. I always turn around and think of a security policy as, a policy that is fluid. If you think about it, every organization we have out there has a static security policy that says, regardless, in the case of, nuclear war, we're going to sit at this security policy. But really, a security policy has to be dynamic, has to account for changes. And I always, again, in the military, we have DEFCON 1 to 5. In Red Spike, we have DEFCON 1 to 5. You don't want to be at DEFCON 1 permanently. You want to be, sort of DEFCON 4, 3, however you want to do it. But the idea is that as the world around you changes, maybe as the threat changes, you can change your security posture, which means things that you can't do all the time in a security policy, maybe like ban USB drives. You might be able to say, look, in this heightened security alert, we get to ban USB drives. So we want to be able to create all this metrics to be able to help you, to be able to sort of provide this story so that, we can force people to understand how things work. And basically so that you can sort of pass this information, mediate this information up to the big wide world. Because I think it's important for us to be able to do that, especially as, it becomes more and more complex. As things become more and more complex, obviously, you're starting to see people really switch off. Starting to see those C-level guys just like switch off when you start talking metrics. And not so many talking metrics, when you start talking cyber. So other things that we're adding, we're obviously, 13.2, we're adding that customizable report, which is going to be really awesome. We've changed one of the big changes, I think it's kind of fundamental as well, is we've changed how we trigger CNZD12s. Because obviously, if I trigger a new IP address, that's great, but what if it's a fully qualified domain name and it's a cloud-based system and its IP address just changes all the time? Then I have to take that into account. So in 13.2, I'm adding some changes in the way we trigger CNZD12 so they can compare a fully qualified domain name as well as IP addressing. And we change that as well into how we import vulnerabilities. Right now we look at acknowledged. If it's acknowledged in the pen test report, don't send to IRC. But we also want to look at, when we acknowledge it, we want to say IP address, fully qualified domain name, those kind of things as well. So, it gives us a little bit better. We're adding that exposure factor, that single loss expectancy, into each item, so you can actually, this is where we're collaborating with you. I think it's always important to understand as, sort of red teaming or pen testing evolves, you're seeing the fact that we are talking about integration. We're integrating with you. Purple teaming is the terminology. But the idea is I don't have the institutional knowledge of your organization. And if you can start putting it in the CIA, or if you can start putting, the SLE, the exposure factor in there, then we can not just identify vulnerabilities, but also look at particular systems that you may be concerned with, and not just every system. Now, it's not saying that, I've got domain admin from printers before, but all I'm trying to point out to that is that if you've got specific systems, and obviously, a system with, 1 million records on it, $148 per record is now that's $148 single loss potential single loss expectancy on that system. Should it got breached, then you may want to think about, okay, how do we secure that system? It's obviously you're better off fixing that system with a vulnerability than something that really don't care about it. So it does give you some prioritization for sure. We're changing sort of some of the stuff for in the portal. You're going to be able to send training emails manually. So if someone clicks, you can have to resend them a training email manually. You're also going to be able to copy the link and put it in your own systems. But don't forget, we can send, hey, you've clicked on a link or you've given us a password and you need to change it. We can send it via your system email, and even by one of your emails. So it comes from your organization separately as opposed to the phishing. One of the things I've said is I'm going to do pagination, which will speed everything up, because sometimes it takes a long time for the threat surface to load on the internal side. This is not necessarily externals. We're adding the ability to do 20 sort of vulnerability scans, schedules, not schedules, whatever. But the idea is we're adding 20 not just 5. We're going to put some tags are going to be able to include in email. So if you've got a ticketing system and we create a project and it triggers an email to that system, you could also set it up that if that system is part of a tag, or if that system is, say you've got a system, I'll give you the example. You might have a development team that runs this particular section, and they only, any fixing has to go to the development team. So you might tag those particular systems or that subnet as development. And in the ticketing system, you might put the tag in the subject line. And so it will grab the tag development and put it in the ticketing system so that it goes to the right people. We're doing some, going to be able to add some notes on threat surface because I think that's interesting because we want to be able to, again, just want to scribble down some things at times. We're changing that new context. And again, we're comparing everything with the pen test report. We're adding some auditing. So who changes what in the pen test report? Because don't forget in 13, we added the ability for you guys to have full admin access as well. That's great. But what if someone said to me, what if someone goes in and changes the pen test to say, hey, we're fantastic when we're not? Then one of the things we're going to do is put some auditing in there. We're adding in, I think, is really good with significant events. So we're going to add that timeline in. We want to be able to track the significant event timeline. We're doing a couple of bug fixing. Hey, this is software. We're only human. But we try to do our best, which is important. And, we're having this ability to acknowledge everything in the technical findings, which is a different column. So you're going to have acknowledge and hide because we want to be able to add everything to it, but not everything goes in the report. Sometimes they're false positives, and we don't want to show them in a report. But we do want to acknowledge the fact that we've seen it. Just deleting it doesn't acknowledge it. It just means it turns up next time, and we don't like that. And then, obviously, hey, exciting times. We got 13.3 coming up shortly after this. We're going to add mass scan into it. Mass scan as well as Nmap. Mass scan's a fantastic tool. Multi-threaded. It could scan the entire internet, looking for a single port, depending upon how you set it up, but a single port in 6 minutes. That banging you can hear is the thunder. Like I said, the world is about to end. But the idea is that it's kind of interesting. We're adding some criteria in 13.3, so an event can have a criteria. So you may want to trigger an event bot, say on new IP address, but you might want to trigger it with a CIA over 5 or an exposure factor, an SLE over $1 million. So you may want to trigger those events just on high-value targets, or alternatively, not on high-value targets, just Boolean kind of criteria. So we're going to be able to, as I said, we're going to select these categories in it. That's definitely something that we're looking at. We want to create categories. Eventually, the way I'm looking at this is there's 2 areas that I can add machine learning. One is to identify significant events. Because that way it takes the bias off the human. Because you might turn around to me and say, well, Darren, you're trying to create the mitigation ratio artificially. And it's like, no, but if I've got an algorithm and it's unbiased and it's a machine learning little system, then it can create it, based upon that. And we actually, one of the things I will do is make how we create a significant event and what the criteria are and everything else, and I'll put that inside the system itself, and you can see it so that it's completely open. It's not hidden or anything else. We're going to filter. We're going to do some web application tags. So where I've got the threat surface right now, we're going to add a new tag for web applications. Overdue, I think. There's a couple of things else that I want to fix, and obviously that gets us into. It really does get us into sort of the 14. And when I talk about 14 is super exciting. That's where the repository and the decision support system start coming into play. That is pure, I think, when that comes into play. Because 15, then you've got the marketplace. In other words, you build scenarios, you can send it out to the marketplace and we'll pay it. That's down the line. It's kind of, it's there. I can see it. I can almost touch where it should be. It's almost there. But I've got to get some things sorted first. Once we get through these next parts, it'll make sense. We'll add some other connectivity into things like Acunetics, WAF, and Core Impact. Although Core Impact technically you could do via scripting. And we might look at being able to integrate some of the blue stuff as well. Be interesting, so maybe a blue team edition. But that's kind of like a quick pathway. Everything's going really well. It's kind of like, right into the dev teams. We're building up. We're getting bigger and stronger, feeling healthier, especially with 13.2. I think 13.2 and 13.3, they've really, there's some health stuff in there that's really taken care of. We become a lot healthier. And when I mean, we're not sort of the 300-pound man jogging on the treadmill, unhealthy right now, but we do want to be super lean. I mean, we're on offensive capability. So after we get past 13, our offensive capability starts to increase again. So I'm looking at 13.2, 13.3, maybe possibly 13.4, but, if depending upon what we find in those two. But really, I think that's how we're going to start to see some of this offensive capability come into play, and adding in mass scan, adding in some other things as well, the repository. This is all creating an offensive tool that can either be an A-bomb or a surgical strike instrument. It's really one of the things I like about it. I always thought, if you could create like multiple red spies and have them hand off when they get sort of to the point where they are full, as it were, maybe their process capacity is full. Maybe if it gets 50 sessions, then hand off to the next system. But and then sort of automatically start building. You could really create something very, very, very powerful that has the potential to do, mass things. But we're the good side. That's the good thing. We are on the good team. We are the good players. The idea is that we want to work with people. We want to make sure that people are safe. And, I've always thought it'd be cool once you get to the point where you can find out all these problems, you could assign a playbook to say, hey, look, this is what we would fix. And, again, I think that's kind of, this is just me thinking off the top of my head here. Maybe you can understand how my thought process goes. But the idea is, I think at some point, if you create this offensive capability, then you want to be able to create these defensive playbooks based upon the criteria that you found and in the data set that we see in the offensive side. So based upon what we see and do and what the capability of is and the results of that, this is the playbooks that I would use to defend that organization. See that big clap of thunder then? It's like, I feel like Frankenstein. We just gave life to a new thing, new idea. But I always say my ideas I have to sleep on a couple of days, which regardless, because sometimes I'll have an idea and I wake up and I think, that wasn't such a great idea there. I've learned, one, to keep my mouth shut, never talk about the ideas, not because anybody cares about them or someone would steal it, because trust me, nobody will. You got to understand that people only care about their own ideas. That's just the way human nature is. But what I found is that you sleep on it in a couple of days, think about it, and sometimes an idea will grow bigger. You'll sit there and go, yeah, that's really, really good. I like that. I like that idea. And then you'll document it and write it down a little bit more, and you think, this is getting better and better. And then after a while, you can start filling it out, packing it, and write it down on paper. Sometimes I'll lay there in the middle of the night and just sit there and talk about something or think about something, talk about it over in my head, think, okay, if I remember it in the morning, then it's going to be a good idea. If it's forgotten, it can't be that good. So sometimes I'll wake up and it's still there and I'll write it down or jot it down and I'll still think about it for a couple of days. I'll sort of pave it in to see how it works. And usually within the first 2 days, I know if something's going to be good or not, or if it's going to be viable. If it grows on you, sometimes you think, yeah, you know what, this is a really good idea. Other times you'd be like, nah, just not going to work. Anyway, enough about how my thought process works, because that's scary. That would be scary to see how I think. But the idea is at times you just, I have these things going over and over and over. Like I literally, how I work for everything, I always look at it from a very pedantic way. I go through like I'm working the system, like I would be sat there pressing the buttons, seeing the results come through, pressing the next button, seeing that result come through, maybe how that would respond. I literally go through the ideas bit by bit. That's how it works. And it's kind of interesting how it works. So it's kind of cool. But, what's the other things that, well, I mean, that's it really. I mean, that's kind of this presentation. I think it's been a pretty good one. And I'm hoping this is going to be out there. So feel free to, again, look, this is where I need questions. People send me questions. No one sent me any questions, so I'm going to ask Ian and Jonathan to send me questions. But I think we had one or two from our internal users. I think one of the questions was again about certifications. Interestingly, like I said, I'm going through my CCIE recert phase, and I know that the GSE, the SANS GSE, I spoke with Jeff Pike, and they're starting to push the GSE. I always recommend the GSE. If you're doing SANS, do the GSE. I mean, it's not impossible. It's a hard one to do, but it does recertify all your other SANS certifications. So if you're like me and you got, a lot of certifications, then it makes sense to want to recertify it once. And again, big clap of thunder as the world ends. And we'll leave it on that, because maybe the world's going to end, and this is going to be my final podcast of the world, but I don't think so. Hopefully everything's going to be cool, and we're all good, and I will see you next time. Everything's going good right now, so again, if you're part of the Red Spy community, we're doing some exciting things. See you, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Shall we play a game?
We got one person online. The workload is enough for like 10 users. I think we got a hacker.
Shall we play a game?
What are they doing to him? Breaking into his mind. It's like hacking a computer. All it takes is time.
Red alert! All hands to man stations.
Hello, friend.
Welcome to Red Spy 365.
Shall we play a game?